Sota Daf Lamed Bet Amud Bet. Listening is intimacy. Kriya Shema b'chol lashon sheata, shomע. And we're busy with the pasuk, the verse that we say so many times every day. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And we're looking at the meaning of that word and how to translate it, how to understand it. And in so doing, we get to a very deep understanding of the very idea of listening and hearing. So it starts with the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, where the Mishnah says, Elu ne'emarin b'chol lashon. These are the things that can be said in any language. They don't have to be said in Lashon HaKodesh. The Parasha of Sota, Vidim, Ma'aser, Kriyat Shema. One of the things that can be said in any language is Kriyat Shema. Says our Gemara on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis at the bottom, Kriyat Shema minalan. How do we know that Kriyat Shema can be said in any language? Tichtiv answers the Gemara, Shema Yisrael, because it says Shema Yisrael, from the word Shema. B'chol lashon sheata shomע. So as long as you understand it, it doesn't matter in what language you're saying it. Shomע means more than just listening to it. Shomע means you get it, you understand it. And if you understand English and you say the Shema in English, that's called Shema. Tanu Rabbanon, we learned in a brayso. This comes from Masechta Brochos on Daf Yud Gimel. Kriyat Shema kiktava divrei Rebbe. Chachamim omrim b'chol lashon. This is a machlokes. It's not so simple. Our Mishnah makes a statement, but not everybody agrees with that statement. Back in Brochos, we've got the brayso where we see it's a machlokes between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi, where Rebbe says that you must say it in Hebrew, kiktava, in the language in which it was written, and Chachamim say you can say it in any language. And the Gemara goes into why and what does it mean, and it says that Rabbanan say, it says Shema b'chol lashon sheata shomע, the same as we learn here. The word Shema means say it in any language that you understand. V'Rebbe nami aktiv Shema, so what does Rebbe say to that? It does say Shema, surely you can say it in any language you can understand. How ba'ale lahashmi'a le'oznecha ma she'ata motzei mipicha. Rebbe says, no, Shema means you've got to hear it aloud. You've got to say Shema aloud. You've got to hear it. It's not, you can't just read it. You've actually got to hear it. So we're dealing with two halachos. What about the Rabbanan? And the Rabbanan hold even if you didn't hear it, you just read it. And as we'll see in the halacha, you pronounce the words but not aloud, that would also work. So we're dealing here with two different halachot around Kriyat Shema. The one is, does it have to be in the original Hebrew, or can you say Kriyat Shema in any language? And the second is, do you have to say it aloud so that you can actually hear the words, or can you read it silently to yourself in a way where even your own ears can't hear it, even though your lips are pronouncing the words, but you're not able to hear them? Those are the two issues that we have. It also comes up on Daf Tesvav in Brochos, where we have a third view of Rabbi Yossi. So if you look in the table I made for you on the source sheet, you'll see clearly the three views. Rabbi says, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, we learn from Shema that it must be said aloud. Can it be said in any language? No, says Rabbi, because I use the word Shema to teach me that it must be said aloud. I don't interpret Shema to mean that you can say it in any language that you understand. I believe Shema means you've got to say it aloud. The Rabbanan say no. Shema means you can say it in any language that you understand. Shema means understand. So according to Rabbi, Shema means hear. So you've got to say it aloud. It doesn't matter whether you understand it or not. According to the Rabbanan, Shema means understand. It doesn't matter whether you can hear it or not. So they have an opposite view of the meaning of the word Shema. And Rabbi Yossi in Brochos says Shema means both. Shema means you must hear it and understand it. That's what the word Shema means. So we learn both from it. Our Tosfos asks, why do we have to say that because the word Shema, according to the Rabbanan, what does Shema mean according to the Rabbanan? It means that it can be said in any language. So what about, does it have to be said aloud? So the Rabbanan hold, no, I've already used the word Shema, I can't use it for that. Ask Tosfos, but we see in Brochos, Rabbi Yossi learns two things out of Shema. Why can't the Rabbanan also learn two things out of the Shema? Why can't the Rabbanan hold like Rabbi Yossi? Why can't the Rabbanan hold that it must be allowed because it says Shema, and you must understand it because it says Shema? That's the simple way of understanding. Rabbi Yossi, in fact, is the easiest way to understand it. Asks Tosfos. Tosfos doesn't answer the question, but the Tosfos Shantz does. And the Tosfos Shantz says, you see from here, the Rabbanan didn't say that it doesn't have to be allowed. The reason that they said it doesn't have to be allowed is because that's the halacha. Rabbi Yossi says it has to be allowed. And Rabbi Yossi says it can be in any language. But the Rabbanan are going la halacha. And la halacha, it can be in any language. Same as Rabbi Yossi and Rabbanan agree on that. But the halacha is that it doesn't have to be allowed. That if b'di'eved you said it silently, that's good as well. So Tosfos Shantz learns from Tosfos' question that the halacha is like the Rabbanan and not like Rabbi Yossi, and not like Rabbi or Rabbi Yossi. And the Shulchan Aruch paskins that way. In Siman Samach Beis, Yachol likrota b'chol lashon. You're allowed to read the Kriya Shema in any language. And in Sif Gimel, you should say it loud enough that your own ears can hear the pronunciation of the words. However, if you can't hear, if you said it too soft to actually hear the words yourself, you still yotze. Says the Shulchan Aruch, as long as you're actually pronouncing it with your mouth, you're not just reading it with your eyes, you're pronouncing each word, but you can't hear it with your ears. B'di'eved, you're still yotze. And the Mishnah Berurah adds, based on various different achronim and poskim, v'dafke, if you say it in any language, dafke b'lashon shemevin bo to lashon. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this that you're allowed to say the Kriyat Shema in any language, that's provided you understand that language. So if you're English speaking, you can say it in English, but you can't say it in Spanish if you don't understand Spanish. And if you're French speaking, you can't say it in German if you don't understand German. But if you're German speaking, you can say it in German. If you're English speaking, you can say it in English. If you're French speaking, you can say it in French, says the Mishnah Berurah. However, avakshanu korin shema b'lashon hakodesh, afilu me'ino mevin lashon yatsa. But in Hebrew, even if you don't understand it, you yotze. So what have we got here? Everybody agrees it's better to say it in Lashon HaKodesh, better to say it in Hebrew. Even if you don't understand what you're saying, that's better than saying it in another language and you do understand what you're saying. So Kriya Shema is not about understanding. So what is it about? What's the point of saying Kriya Shema and you don't understand what you're saying? Mishnah Berurah says, by the way, the first sentence you have to understand, but he says everybody understands Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's not a problem. But the rest of the Kriya Shema, if you're saying it in Hebrew, you don't have to understand it. Why not? So what does it mean? And if you look according to Rebbe says that you're not even allowed to say it in another language. Rebbe holds that if I don't understand Hebrew, I only understand English, or I understand 6 other languages but no Hebrew, you can't say it in any of the 6 languages that you understand. You've got to say it in Hebrew. And even the Rabbanan, who the halachas like the Rabbanan, say, well, you can. If you understand other languages, you can say it in the languages that you understand. But it's better to say it in Lashon HaKodesh, even if you don't understand. So what does it mean? Why would you say Kriya Shema and not understand it? What does that mean? And here we have a hugely important principle in the art of listening, and what listening means and what listening doesn't mean. And it revolves around how you translate the word Shema. This whole sugya revolves around how you translate the word Shema. Rabbi Sachs, in his translation of the Siddur, changed the traditional translation from Hear, O Israel, to Listen, O Israel. And if you learn the sugya, you see he's right. It should be Listen, O Israel, not Hear, O Israel. What does the word Shema mean? Shema can mean 2 things. It can mean hear, it can be listen. What is the difference between hear and listen? Hear is the outcome. I hear you. I've heard you. Now, if I didn't understand a word you've said, it doesn't help me saying, I heard you. You didn't hear me. You didn't understand my language. You couldn't understand a word I said. How can you say you heard me? I heard you means I get you. I understand what you said. Listening is an activity. Listening is not about the outcome. Hearing is the outcome. The outcome is I heard. Listening, maybe I don't hear. Maybe I don't understand. Maybe I don't get it. So what's the value in listening if I don't get it? So there's an enormous value in listening, because listening to somebody allows that person to feel heard in the sense of somebody's paying attention to them. People are very thirsty for being listened to, because mostly we don't listen to people. And what does that mean? The Aruch HaShulchan was known as, apart from being the great posek of his time, he was also a person who gave a lot of smichas to others. He trained rabbis and he gave smicha to rabbonim. And before he would give smicha to a young man, he would insist that they spent a week or 2 in his house with him. So it wasn't just a test for a couple of hours, it was to live with him in his house, which gave him an opportunity to see the person, to see his midos, to see how he behaves, what kind of a human being he is. But in addition to that, it gave him an opportunity to train the young man in psak, in how to be a rov. And we learned in Masechta Sota not so long ago that afilu korov v'shona v'lo shimesh tamidei chachomim am ha'oretzu. If a person knows the whole of Tanakh, and he knows all of Mishnayos, and he knows the whole of Shas, but he's never lived with a Talmid Chacham, he's never served a Talmid Chacham, he's never had an apprenticeship. If one's never had an apprenticeship, you're still in the realm of Am Haaretz. You don't understand the Torah yet. Because it's in the serving of the Talmid Chacham that you really get the nuances of Talmud Torah. And it was during those few weeks that the Aruch HaShulchan would allow the Talmud to be with him, to have apprenticeship. And one of the things he used to do, his son, the Makor Baruch, writes, one of the things that the Aruch HaShulchan used to do is teach the young man not how to answer a shaila, how to hear a shaila, how to listen to a shaila. And he would say to the young man, when you're listening to a shaila, when somebody comes with a question, it doesn't matter how simple the question is, and even though you think you know the answer before it's even out of their mouths, you've got to be 100% present. You've got to take time out to listen. During the time that you're listening, there can be no interruptions. During the time that you're listening, your mind can't wander to something else. During the time that you're listening, there should be no expression on your face that could indicate to the person that you're making a judgment already, that you're approving or disapproving of what they're saying. Because all of those things will influence the degree to which the other person feels properly heard. Because part of the reason people come with a shaila is that the Rov hears them, that the Rov understands them, that the Rov is listening to them. Because listening is an enormous act of intimacy. When you listen to another person, there's an enormous act of intimacy. You will often find in marriages, a wife will discuss a problem she's having with her husband. And as men usually do, they jump straight into solution mode. So why don't you do this? Oh, so yeah, I get it. So why don't you do this? And perhaps you could do this, and I can help you with that. And she says, I don't need you to solve it for me. So why are you telling me? I just want you to hear. That phrase in marriage counseling is one of the most oft heard phrases. I just want him to hear. I don't need his solutions. I'll figure it out myself. I just want him to hear. And we don't listen while the other person's speaking. We're already thinking of the solutions. The other person's asking a question. We're already thinking of the answers. But just to give the other person the respect of, I'm with you. I'm fully present. I'm listening to you. I don't even know if I understand you. Very often that can happen. Apparently, Oscar Wilde said, women are not to be understood, they're to be loved. Don't even try and understand. You don't have to understand always. You don't always have to understand everybody. You don't have to understand the Rebbeinu Shalom. You don't always have to understand the Torah. Just hear it. Just listen carefully. And that's what Kriya Shema is. Kriya Shema is Shema. It's listening to the Rebbeinu Shalom talking. And that you can only do in the original language. So when does the person feel more listened to? If you're sitting listening to their language, even though you don't understand their language, but you're listening with 100% attention, or you're listening to a translated version of the person. Where does the speaker feel more listened to? Where is there more intimacy? Where is there more connection? When you're listening, whether you understand or not, you're listening to the nuances, you're listening to the sounds, you're listening to the intonations, you're listening to the body language, whatever you can get, you're listening to, even though you don't understand the actual wording. That's in the original. That's why we learned yesterday morning in the Medrash here at Meir Soloveitchik's amazing principle of the difference between Limud Torah and Yedias Chochmas HaTorah. Understanding the wisdom of Torah and learning Torah are two completely different mitzvahs. One is V'gita bo yomam v'layla, and one is Lalechis bo that we had in the Parsha. And how we talked about the fact V'gita bo yomam v'layla is being plugged into Hashem. V'gita bo yomam v'layla is learning Torah, because when you're learning Torah, you're listening to Hashem. Whether you're understanding it fully or you're not understanding it fully, when you're learning Torah, Hashem is talking and you're listening. When we're learning Torah, we're listening to Rabbi Yehuda Anossi. We're listening to Rabbi Yossi. We're listening to the Chachamim. We're sitting at their feet and hearing. We're listening to their speaking, their actual words we're listening to. That's an unbelievable act of intimacy that we're capable of having. When the Pasuk says in Eicha, Shfoich kamayim libecha noichach pnei Hashem. Pour out your heart like water in the presence of Hashem. Gemara learns that that's talking not about tefillah, it's talking about limud Torah. The Reishis Chochmah says when you're learning Torah, you're sitting opposite Hashem. You've got to think of yourself sitting at the table. There's Hashem, there's you. Literally opposite. You're having communication. You're listening to Hashem talking. You're sitting right in front of you. That's why the Reishis Chochmah says it's a terrible indecency to distract yourself while you're learning. You learn, somebody walks through the door, everybody looks up. Would you do that if the Rebbeinu Shalom was sitting in front of you? You wouldn't do that. That's how you would have felt, the Rebbeinu Shalom sitting in front of you. You've got a cell phone, and you look at the screen in the cell phone. Your computer's on, you look at the computer screen while you're learning Torah, Hashem's in front of you. That feeling of connection, we've got to develop that feeling that when I'm learning Torah, I'm connected to Hashem in the most intimate way one can be connected. And we discussed yesterday, learning Torah for a man is a much more intimate connection than tefillah, than davening. Learning, you're much more connected to Hashem. And somehow we'll cut the learning short, or we'll do whatever we do to get to the davening, davening. Yeah, davening's important, but nothing like limud Torah. When you're sitting in front of Hashem, you're actually communicating with Hashem. Davening, you're talking. You ask your wives, or wives are listening in, you ask your husbands, where do you feel closer to your partner? When they're talking or when they're listening? You're much closer when the other person's listening. Davening, we're busy talking. Learning Torah, we're busy listening. And Kriya Shema is listening. Before we get to Shmona Esrei, listen before you speak. Before you talk, make sure you've listened carefully, whether you've heard or not, whether you've understood or not. It doesn't matter that much. What's important is you've really listened. You've been 100% present. You've said Kriya Shema and you've heard the words. You've heard the Rebbeinu Shem speaking, Ve'ahavto, Ve'hayoim Shamua. You've listened to the words. You've heard every word of Hashem. Now you want to speak, you can get up and speak in Shmona Esrei. But make sure that you've listened before. And the same when we're learning Gemara, you're learning Mishnah, you're learning Halacha, whatever it is that we're learning, you're hearing the voice of Hashem, you're sitting opposite Hashem, you're connecting in the most intimate way that it's possible to connect with the Rebbeinu Shalom in the listening and the studying of Torah.